Hello everyone, Republic Jim here. Happy New Year to everyone. I'm taking advantage of the extended weekend to get out in the woods a bit and just get some exercise and work on some of my skills. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk about something that's been on my mind, which involves situational awareness, because all too often I see things in the news about disasters, emergencies, or whatever you want to call them, where people fall victim to things that, unfortunately, that quite often I think could have been avoided if people have been paying attention and were more aware of imminent threat. Now, with that said, I realize there are things that we have no control over. We can do everything right and still have something just out of the blue happen. You know, whether that's a car accident that we can't possibly avoid, or just some other freak incident. Things can always happen regardless of our best efforts. So I'm fully aware of that. I'm not trying to blame anybody for the misfortunes that befall them. But as in the case of this blizzard and many fatalities during that, is very unfortunate, but I think most of those at least could have been avoided if people had taken heed of the warnings and been prepared. You have to expect that in severe weather, there's always a chance that you could get trapped in your vehicle, or get your vehicle stuck and have to abandon it or whatever. And you're going to have extreme temperatures and other nasty conditions. And with anything like that, it just makes sense to be aware of the hazards ahead of time and plan accordingly. And so I'm going to just get situated here, make myself comfortable, and expand a little bit on those thoughts and provide some different sources, things that I check for keeping up on impending threats and that sort of thing. So I'll be back in just a moment. All right, that's a little more comfortable at one of my regular campsites, and I have a little bit of a platform to sit on. The snow right now has changed quite a bit since last time I was out, since it warmed up multiple times and refroze. It's packed down and a little more icy, much more flotation with the snowshoes, but it's also much wetter than the powder we had before, so kind of like to stay out of the snow if possible. So anyway, getting back to the topic, basic situational awareness normally involves just being observant of what's happening around you at the moment. If there's any imminent threats, any suspicious looking people acting like they're going to do something, keeping an eye on traffic, any hazardous objects around, what the weather's doing at the time. But it can also apply in a broader sense to much greater distances and time frames, just to be aware of what is coming and what is foreseeable. I've seen a lot of comments about things that people can't avoid, and mention things like tsunamis and volcanoes and wildfires and different things like that. And granted, some of those things can happen almost instantaneously and not give you enough warning to get away. So I'm not saying that everybody that gets caught by them is just oblivious, but for the most part, any sort of disaster like that has some warning signs. I mean, unless a wildfire starts up directly next to you, you know, you can see the smoke off in the distance. Usually there are numerous websites and warning systems for wildfires. And, you know, when you're in the middle of summer, everything's bone dry, it just makes sense to pay attention to those sources and be alert for any sort of signs of a fire starting and be prepared to get out of the way ahead of time. You know, and like in the example of a tsunami, obviously I'm not too worried about it where I live in the mountains, but for anybody that lives along a coastline, especially on one that's really close to sea level, they should always be alert for any major earthquakes, even if they feel just minor shaking, but it lasts for a long time. That's a pretty good indication of a far off, extremely large quake. Or if they see the water suddenly recede, as happened in the 2004 quake that hit Indonesia and other parts of Asia. You know, when there was a massive quake and suddenly the water receded a big distance. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people that didn't know any better, and they ran out because, you know, there were fish and other things that were exposed by the water suddenly going away. And then they got caught by the tsunami that came in. But, you know, if you're near the coast and low ground and you see any signs like that of a big quake or the water going out, then the intelligent thing to do is, as soon as things stop shaking, just instantly start making your way towards high ground as quick as you can. And if people do that, the vast majority of them would never get caught by a tsunami. There are some places where you're not going to have enough time to get to high ground or get high enough, depending on the size of the tsunami. But in most cases, there's going to be, you know, several minutes at least where you have a chance to react and get to higher ground. If it's quite a ways offshore, it could take 15 minutes or a half hour or more, depending on how far out it is. And that gives you a pretty good chance to really get far enough out of the way. As far as volcanoes, sometimes they just blow their stack with no warning, but that's extremely rare. In most cases, like in Hawaii, when it's getting ready for an eruption, there's a lot of seismic activity in the buildup as magma comes up to the surface. And, you know, there's just a lot of warning signs like that. And so there's no reason that anybody should be caught off guard by that. You know, for instance, the Mount St. Helens eruption, you know, some people, unfortunately, were killed by the flooding that happened when the log jam broke up. But as far as people that were actually caught in the eruption, I mean, it was like people that chose not to leave, like that Harry Truman guy, and, you know, and that's their choice. He was aware of what was going to happen and simply chose not to leave, but there's no reason that anybody should have been caught off guard by that. And that's kind of the way most volcanoes are. So when they start rumbling and putting up plumes of smoke, and especially if lava flow starts, then, you know, they're not an instantaneous disaster. So there's that warning and an opportunity to take action and get away. And, you know, I could go on. There's multiple different scenarios like that, but in general, you know, hurricanes, blizzards, whatever, we have lots of early warning now with the technology that we have. So it's up to people to have that situational awareness, keep an eye on things, especially in the appropriate season for that, and just have emergency supplies on hand and be ready to get out or shelter in place or whatever the appropriate response is. But it's really important that people need to be informed, be proactive in checking to see what could potentially be coming. So I just wanted to go over a few sources that I try to check on a regular basis. Just, I'm sure other people could add other sources of information, but some that I find handy. First of all, the most obvious is just news stations, whichever ones you happen to like. I actually recommend multiple news sources from all sides of the political spectrum, just because they tend to focus on different things, and sometimes if you only follow one, then you miss out on news on other ones that could be relevant. So, and I'm not talking about just local news, although that's important, but also state level, national level, and international, because certainly international things can have a big impact on us too. So definitely good to keep tabs on that. And some of the things that I watch for in the news are things that could affect our economy, our supply chain, civil unrest, or international warfare type things. There's a lot going on right now, but like, for instance, when the cargo ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, that was something that I saw on the news shortly after it happened, and I was surprised by how many people hadn't heard about it for several days until it really became a fiasco. But the moment that I saw that had happened, I understood that that was going to have a huge impact on supply chain and was going to cause issues with getting certain items delivered, and would also cause some inflation because of that logjam there. So, things like that, good to keep an eye on. Energy shortages or delivery issues, just so you know whether there might be a problem with being able to gas up or get fuel for heating or any of that sort of thing. All those things should be covered somewhere in the news, but they might not always be just in the one source that people focus on. So, as I said, check out a variety of news sources and just keep an eye out for some of those things that could have a big effect on everyday life. Then another obvious one is weather. And again, I check multiple weather sites and look at short-term and long-term forecasts. And then, I try to at least a few times a week look at what the weather is doing on the national scale, because while I want to be aware of what's happening in my area especially, it's good to see what it's doing around the country, and again, how that will affect supply chain and travel and various other things like that. So if you can see that a certain part of the country is going to be getting just slammed with the storm or something, especially if you're planning to travel or you're getting a delivery that's coming from in that area, then you have a heads up that there's going to be some problems with that. So, just keep an eye on the weather, and have a better idea of what to expect, how to dress, what to carry in your vehicle to be prepared, and that sort of thing. And then, along with weather, kind of related, I like to look at the National Data Buoy System and see if there's any issues offshore in the oceans. Can be a good indication of tsunamis or major storms, that sort of thing. It's just not something I really rely on a lot, but I check on it now and then just to see if any buoys are showing any unusual motion. And also the space weather site. It's always good to know what the sun is doing if there's anything unusual happening as far as solar flares, coronal mass ejection, that sort of thing. Things that could mess with GPS or radio or satellite stuff. Again, not anything that I'm overly concerned about, but I try to check it at least once a day just to see what they're forecasting or if the sun has done anything unusual, because it could have a major effect if we do have a big solar flare that hits the Earth. So generally there's a little bit of warning when it throws one out, and if it's coming towards us, if you're checking that daily, you can see, like, if you have a day or two to prepare and make any plans for that. So just a good resource to have there. And then I always like to check on earthquakes. Of course, I'm just into earthquakes in general. I like to follow seismic activity around the globe and just kind of keep an eye on what's happening. If activity is ramping up or if it's hitting more on the west coast, that can be a pretty good indication, if you live along the coast especially, that you should be prepared for something like that. And there are certain patterns that crop up where when you see strong activity in one location, it's fairly predictable that it will be hitting soon in other locations. And if you follow that on a regular basis, you can see those patterns and have a rough idea of what to expect. So if you're in an area that tends to get a lot of seismic activity, you can possibly have a day or two of heads up of any potential earthquake activity. So that's a useful one to track. And I also look at the Pacific Northwest seismic activity and the Pacific Northwest tremor map, just to get a better idea of what's happening. And I should mention, all these different sites that I like to use, I'll put links to some of them. I mean, the news and the weather ones are kind of self-explanatory. You can figure out whichever ones you want to use for that. But some of the other more obscure sites, I'll put links down below in the description, just to make it easier to find those if you're interested. So, and of course in the summer or anytime there's fire danger, there's Wildcat and several other sites where they keep track of fire activity. So, and I usually have a fire overlay on Google Earth also, so that I can keep track of that during fire season. Just try to have a little more warning if anything is threatening. I don't really like it when they sneak up on us. I like to know before it's visible that there's something on the horizon, so I can be prepared for that. And one other site that I should mention is volcano discovery. I also do like to just check in now and then and see which volcanoes are showing signs of activity or which ones are actively erupting. And if ones are showing signs of coming to life, just keeping an eye on what they're doing, and especially if they're near populated areas. So anybody who lives near or downwind from an active volcano should definitely keep that in mind. I know a lot of people like to just ignore that and say, oh, it's something we don't have any control over. But I'm sorry, if one of them starts showing real signs that it's going to erupt at any moment, then that should be a good time to use that situational awareness and take action and pack up what you can and get out of the way, because there's no point waiting until the last minute and then trying to fight to get out of town. So anyway, the volcano discovery is a pretty good site. I think there are some others, but I mean, it's not something that I track all the time just because we don't live right by a volcano. But it's still good to keep it in mind and check on it. And so those are some of the ones that I keep an eye on. And there's other stuff I check occasionally. If I think of anything else after this, I'll add that in the comments. But hopefully it's been some useful suggestions there for people. And feel free to comment with anything that you use to improve your situational awareness and be prepared. And I just encourage everybody to work at being a little more prepared in 2023. I see a lot of signs that things are just getting worse, especially the economy and supply chain and that sort of thing. And I think there's a lot of nasty globalists out there that would like to take down the United States and make our lives more miserable. And you know, there's, as somebody who's into preparedness, I try to just constantly work at becoming more prepared. And you know, if things get better, that would be great, but I'm not counting on it. I'm going to do my best to be ready for whatever may happen. Hopefully everybody else will do the same, and just hope you all have a great year and continue to get more prepared, and just continue to follow along, and hopefully I'll have some other useful information soon. So that's all for now. This has been Republic Jim. I'll talk to you later.